And go ahead and call the Marathon County Infrastructure Committee meeting to order. It is 1:05.
And I'll call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order, and it could either be 12:58 or 1:05. I think we'll go with 1:05.
All right, we'll move on to item 2, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have anybody that signed up for public comment? Hearing and seeing no one signed up and no one coming to address the mic, we'll move on to item 4. Operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. 4A, discussion and possible action regarding changing our county highway bituminous paving financing strategy. 1, overview of current bituminous paving financing strategy. Levy and registration fees. And if it's okay with the committees, we'd like to move up to item B, report on that, if everybody's okay with that. All right, we'll move forward with that, and I'll hand it over to Commissioner Griesbach.
So in your packet, you have a report on the roadmap. They have a full report in there. We have the summary, but what we have online is that Debbie Jackson, the executive director from the Wisconsin TDA, who is part of this policy forum. We invited Debbie today just to kind of go through basically the lay of the land, both federal and state, where we're heading, where she can see in her crystal ball where we're heading for financial. So we're just heading financially. Let's leave it at that. So, if John want to add anything, otherwise I'll just hand it over to Debbie.
No, I think that the relevance of this is that I think it gives a high-level view of where we are relative to funding and the potential partnership with the state. And I think the report does a good job of laying out where we are relative to funding sources. So with that, I think we can turn it over to her.
Debbie, we can't hear you. I know you said you can hear us, but at this point we can't hear you.
Mm-mm. You just dropped off.
We can give her a minute to come back on. Jim, do you have contact information?
Hi guys, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't get my video to work, but if you can hear me, we can do this. Does that work?
Yes, that works great, Debbie. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, I appreciate being here today. You do have the report. Jim asked me to kind of give a top view of where we are with transportation in Wisconsin. TDA was one of the sponsors of this report. We did work on it. We were together with the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce and the Commercial Realtors and the Wisconsin Economic Development Association's Foundation. And our goal was to document where we were, when we're talking about dollars or we're talking about conditions, how we compared to other states in certain ways, and then revenue scenarios, and then revenue options. The report is about 50 pages long. The executive summary is about 10. So I'm going to give you what I hope you would walk away with if somebody were to read this report. So I would say in some ways there's nothing brand new or eye-opening about the report. We have been struggling with how to fund transportation here in Wisconsin for a couple decades. And I would say we are not alone. Other states and the national government are as well. And the key to our issue is that we have fixed flat fees that are not keeping up with the needs of our aging infrastructure system. When I say our fees are fixed and flat, I'm talking about the gas tax, which is per gallon, and the vehicle registration fee, which is per vehicle, which means these fees do not grow like a percentage-based fee, let's say a sales tax or an income tax. We don't get more money when the price of gas goes up or if the vehicle costs more. The only way our revenues grow is if people drive more, which again means we have more wear and tear on the system. The important thing about these fixed flat fees is that means that they have no ability to deal with inflation. And I'm sure you guys have spent a significant time in recent years talking about the impact of inflation across all areas. But from a construction point of view, we're always a multiple of CPI. So when we hit these historic periods of time when we're having high inflation, it's even more profound on the transportation side. One of the ways in which we were able to offset some of the impacts of inflation, although not all of it, was the increased federal funding that came through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we have this aging system, we have vehicles that are becoming more efficient, we have costs that are increasing. And so what the state has done in the absence of dealing really in any significant way with the user fee issue, we have increasingly relied on general fund revenues. In the current budget, we have $750 million of general fund revenue. The largest chunk of that is $550 million in one-time money. We also got an ongoing, let's say, transfer of the EV sales tax, which is about $100 million estimated in this budget. My guess is it didn't hit that amount, and it will not be that big next budget. And then we have a current 0.25% transfer of all general fund revenue. We use these funds to do two things. One of which was to buy down a lot of bonding in the current budget, which allowed us to have some money to seed a grant application for the Blatnick Bridge. But the other thing we used it for was one-time funding for programs that are very popular, like the Local Roads Improvement Program Supplemental and the brand new Agricultural Roads Improvement Program. We could do this in this budget because we had a $7 billion surplus. Going into the next budget, we think that the news reports are that it's about $4 billion. So if we look at this next budget, built into our kind of the base of what we need to hit is a shortfall that's pretty close to $1 billion if we want to keep all the things that are currently going on and then invest in some projects that are coming online. We anticipate that this budget, given that there is a surplus, that the natural course will probably be to say, hey, let's just give another helping of general fund. But the problem then comes in 2027-29 budget when there is no more, let's say, general fund surplus money, and we would have to make hard decisions about, programs, on both sides, let's say, of the general fund and the trust fund divide. So as we're looking at this, we have our stagnant revenue, we have aging infrastructure, and we have a lot of, I would say, bills coming due on the 60-year-old interstate. When we received the helping of additional money from the federal government, a lot of it went down to the local system, and you guys really needed it. And I think that that has been a boon to you. But as we're looking forward, a lot of the interstate projects that were delayed under previous administrations are back in the hopper. And so that's going to add another level of, let's say, stress to the transportation fund. So if I were to kind of get it into a nutshell, I think we're in a situation that we probably need more money just to maintain the system conditions we've got. I will throw out one other kind of uncertainty that's out there. I've mentioned the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Again, it was a significant shot in the arm when we needed it, especially as inflation ramped up. That bill comes up for reauthorization in 2026. We do not know which components of it will be reauthorized and which components will be let go. I think that there's a way to think that a lot of kind of the standard formula funds will continue, but a lot of the other newer programs that came directly out of the general fund may or may not continue. And so we look into the future, and we are not sure that federal funding will be as much after 2026 as it is today. Primarily because the IIGA was significantly deficit funded. The gas tax has not been increased since 1993. So I would say, this report was part of TDA working with partners to begin to educate our lawmakers on the challenges facing our transportation fund. We have the largest slate of new legislators in over a decade. Almost 30% of the legislature is new. And so we're going to have to make sure to stop and make the case about how transportation is financed, the challenges built into how we fund our transportation system, and then begin to work with them on solutions. We are going to be doing similar activities on the federal level. TDA is going up to DC in April, and we will again start talking to our legislature, our delegation in DC, about the importance of the federal dollar, because even if you did not directly benefit from a federal dollar, which I'm sure Marathon County did, but even if you hadn't, the federal funds coming in alleviates stress on the system. It takes a program or a project that would have been state funded, and it makes it federal funded, which gives us all some room to breathe. So I would say in conclusion, we understand the challenge ahead of us. We're working on it. We have always worked very closely with the counties association and the county highways groups to help make this case. So we have a lot of good projects going forward. And I would say if we want to keep these good projects and programs moving forward, we're going to have to, we've got some work to do. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Jim, and see if anybody has any questions.
I'd like to just interject a comment, is that, so what does this mean to us at the county level? And I think what you're seeing is Mike Colas, who's executive director of the Wisconsin Towns Association, a real critical issue relative to the funding of local roads in the state of Wisconsin, because we've been moving general fund revenues, general tax revenues, into the transportation fund, and that works until the first recession hits. And then we've got a significant shortfall. So the state has sort of committed to a 30% funding level for local roads. They're at 19%. So if the state funding continues to come down, our share to maintain the county trunk highway system will go up, because general transportation aids will come down. So we have skin in the game relative to the state funding sources, and to make sure there's some stability to it. There were a number of scenarios laid out in the report, including basically a 2% increase and a 0% increase. Under both of those scenarios, there will be a push or a shift of cost back to the local counties and/or towns, because we'll have to come up with that money elsewhere. So as we start looking at our revenue streams, what happens on the state level significantly impacts our ability to fund our projects. Jim, I don't know if you wanted to add anything relative to the state's commitments or historic.
You hit it right on the head.
Not on.
We'll try this one. Yeah, you hit it right on the head. Since I've been here, we've been seeing the decrease of GTA. As you mentioned, it initially was set to be a 30% cost share. We've never seen 30% even from when the program started. John mentioned we were down to 19. I believe we're actually a tick below 19%. That's based on a 6-year average. We've been trying to increase our workload even with the increase of our spending due to being successful in the BIL bill and getting many projects. We've seen a steady decrease of our GTA. So it's a twofold. One, we've been very fortunate, and it was part of your packet spreadsheet that we put together with all of our projects, where you see we have over $9 million worth of projects, our share. It's $48 million worth of projects, and our share is 9.5. So we've been very fortunate to get that funding, but it comes with two tickets. One, we still have to pay that 20%, which is a great deal for us. And even when we've been doing this extra work, our GTA has been going down, so we have to increase our local levy just to maintain our roads.
Are there any questions for Deb or Jim? Me to call him.
Yeah, if you want to.
We're going to bounce back to 1A, a review of the Marathon County 2050 Highway System Sustainability Study. And just by way of background, this was done a few years ago, actually, when I chaired the Infrastructure Committee, but it was based upon work that was done in Washington County, which is a peer county relative to their looking at how to fund the roads over the next 30 years. And we have Dennis, Lawrence, and Daryl from the North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission who prepared the report. So if you'd like to come forward. That's fine.
Back there.
Yes.
All right. People can hear me? Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting us over. Like John said, this is a study that was completed a couple of years ago. I think the findings are still relevant. I think from the conversation from the first speaker, just kind of talking about funding uncertainty and hard decisions, I think that's certainly something that was identified in the document that we provided some assistance to a few years back. I guess I don't want to get into all the details of it. I know it's been brought forward to Infrastructure Committee, and I think a couple of other groups have looked at it as well. But basically what we did is really looked at the full county highway system. I mean, it's over 600 miles of roadway. Obviously a big county, you're going to have a lot of roads, and just kind of looked at the cost to kind of maintain a system like that, and then sort of projecting those financing streams over the course of time, and then looking at, are we maintaining that system, or we're going to start losing quality in that system kind of at the current level of funding. And I think really that's what the study drove home, is that every year as we move forward, we are spending less than we need to spend to maintain that system. I think the county strategic plan has talked about maintaining infrastructure, and I think the policy of the highway department and the county board is to kind of maintain 7 or better in a PACER rating, which is kind of an overall rating system on a 1 to 10, to maintain that system countywide at a 7 or above. I think the county is now at the point where they need to make very hard decisions in terms of additional dollars to transportation, or they're going to start either degrading that system, and they're just not going to be able to maintain what they've been providing to the citizens of Marathon County over the last several years. I guess that really is kind of a quick overview. I think a couple of things, and I'm not sure who's working but if you could maybe go to page 36 of the study, I think this really kind of puts to numbers, if you will, kind of those gaps in funding as we move forward. We sort of consolidated into 5-year time periods and we do have a table at the end of the study that does it on an annual basis. But as you can see, every 5 years we are falling further and further behind without additional funding. And I think that's, I know Jim kind of just talked to that those general transportation aids are not what we had hoped they would be. The trend is probably not great for those. All the other funding sources are pretty stable in today's rate, but not as we move into the future. And as you know, the impacts of inflation, just the cost for projects as we move forward are going to impact that network. So this is kind of what we had identified, and this is sort of adjusted for inflation as you move forward. But obviously, over the planning period, I mean, a pretty substantial gap, which means the county has a couple of decisions to make, right? I mean, you're either, one, going to just let the system slowly degrade a bit, which is certainly an option. I'm not sure that's the best option. The other one is maybe trying to reduce the size of that network. Obviously, there's about 40 miles of county highway that are within cities and villages. There might be some opportunities to work with those communities to maybe take some roadway off the network. But that's not going to probably solve a lot of problems. I mean, it's probably a pretty tiny percentage. And then the third thing comes down to revenue, right? I think the TDA talked about that. I think Jim made some reference to it. I think the numbers that you see in our report and all over is that there is a gap and it continues to widen. And that is really kind of I guess the bottom line, if you will, within the planning effort that we did. So hopefully that's an overview of kind of what we did. If there's any questions, or John, if you had any further information you wanted me to kind of drill down on.
The current gap is predicated upon the continuation of the wheel tax and the current revenue streams, is it not?
Correct. I think we have in the revenue section of the study kind of talk about where we're at with those different funding sources. And it does include that wheel tax at the current rate. I know there's a suggestion in here that for time to time, maybe that is looked at as a possible way to increase, maybe move that up in relation to inflation rates or on a regular basis, just to kind of maintain at least some additional revenue in the system. But yes, that is part of the funding stream.
I'd just like to highlight that currently 75% of our roads in the county have weight limits on them. And the infrastructure committee hasn't had a request recently, but there have been numerous requests in the past to remove weight limits on parts of the roads. And when you do that, the cost to construct or reconstruct goes to $1.5 to $2 million a mile. And we probably will need to look at that as trucks get heavier and demands grow, and as we see people trying to expand their use of our county trunk highway system to move goods and services. So I think that that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind, is that we haven't factored that into the cost estimates. Jim?
And I can just tag on that. There is a very strong push at the federal level to raise the limits to 98,000 pounds instead of 80,000. And if that becomes federal, it'll go through the state too. So there's a good probability down the road those weight limits are going to increase on the county roads.
Are there Are there any questions? And I think I would really encourage you to take a good look at that report because it broke down, what are the most used roads? What are the issues? Bike, paving shoulders for bike, multimodal transportation, I think is a good report. But again, it was trying to, one of the goals was for us to try to get a stable spending level going forward so we didn't have hiccups in the general transportation aid, to do a better job of planning, because we would historically, when state aid went down, we'd cut our funding, which had a 6-year tail to it. We were looking at trying to develop a schedule. And I think Kevin's done a very good job of laying out what some of the options are relative to extending the life of the road, whether it's a resurface, a seal, and or reconstruction. And I think those all come into play. But if our goal is to maintain a PACER rating of 7, we need to make the investments necessary to keep those roads smooth and safe. Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I spent a lot of time reading this. I'm kind of a geek when it comes to maps, so I really dug in. But on pages 42 and on, it talks about some recommendations. There were 5. I'm wondering, have any of those been enacted since this was published? I'm especially interested in the implementation of the highway maintenance tracking database.
Actually be on page 39 of the document itself. Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of sort of recommendations at the end of the document that are kind of for consideration. I don't think that there was probably action on these. I'm not sure what the conversation was with infrastructure and with the highway folks. But I mean, I'll just provide a quick review, and then Jim can kind of talk to the question specifically. But I think there's 5 things that were really identified as recommendations. One is sort of doing a priority scoring system, looking at the network. So wherever you kind of have problem areas, those kind of would be addressed first, which kind of is a step away from kind of the life cycle and maintenance system that we've been doing now. It really just kind of throws money at the most critical need. The tracking database is really sort of developing a software to kind of track each segment. So whenever there's an improvement to that road, you can look at kind of what type of treatment was done to it and which one lasts longer. So when you're doing it again, it's like, if you're doing a seal coat or something else, you can kind of identify what is the best option moving forward. That was really kind of the feeling to that. I think they kind of do it internally, but they don't really have a formal tracking system for that. And then we'd also talked about maybe doing a functional classification study, kind of looking at the way the roads work within the county itself. As you know, a big network like that, and a lot of them run in municipalities, they kind of act more as a local road than a county highway. So those would likely be priorities for maybe looking at working with communities to kind of push those roads off the network. And then we talked about communities should probably be updating their comprehensive plan so we have better planning information, so we can look at the way the transportation network works within the county. And then we talked about revenue streams. So that's kind of the setup to you, Jim.
Thank you. So some of the things that we are doing and did is the PACER ratings, for one. That's a tracking process. We have to report every 2 years to the state. We've gone now every year. We've been doing the PACER rating to kind of keep a little better track. As far as the databases, we have a couple things ongoing. Kevin's been working very closely with the Conservation Planning Group and the GIS folks over there. We do have maps now that we kind of track all of our culverts, for example. Right now, this past year, every culvert between 6 and 20 foot, we went out and did an inspection on. We're entering into the state's HIS system that they have out there. So we're doing more of those. We have coordinates and culvert types in for all of our culverts. So going down the road, we track all the repairs on those. And the other thing we are working right now with City County IT on is a new software called Cartograph, which is going to implement throughout the county, which is basically a tracking system from asset management. So we're working on that process right now. As far as local municipalities taking over jurisdictions, I'm working on a small one. I brought it up with the Village of Marathon on County Trunk Highway Double N, just coming out of town, doing a JT with them. Besides that, local municipalities, with the cost with maintaining and taking care of a road, we have very little or no interest in any municipality wanting to take over a section of road. I mean, we had a couple, Tom was on the town board for Town of Day forever, and I don't believe if we'd come to the Town of Day and say, would you want to take over a section of road? That's the answer we get. So the JT is a tough one. We work on those as we get them, but that's about all we have on those. And if you have anything for tracking you want to add, or?
This is more on the softer side, but what we do is internally, we have a group of some of our paving operators, our road guys, and we spread them out throughout the county so we can kind of keep an eye on our projects and then report back. That group works to look at the roads that we're going to be addressing. We meet with them and develop kind of 5-year plans, and also they review. Those are the guys that are running the paver and are seeing what's going on out there. So they're kind of our best eyes and ears in that. So it's not a hard database, but it gives us a good feel for when we go in with a 1-inch overlay that we're going to get 8 to 12, 13, 14 years out of it, depending on what the subgrade soils are. A 2-inch overlay gives us so much life, and then pulverize. And we have a good feel for what those lifetimes are, and we use that. But I don't per se have a spreadsheet that has a lifetime of the pavements as they fall off. We kind of keep an eye on them, and then every 5 years or every year we adjust that 5-year plan based on what we're seeing out there and what our guys are experiencing on the roads.
If I can add one thing before I see Supervisor Soibert has a question. On page 12 of the electronic document, page 8 of the packet, I think is what Dennis was referencing. When you look at those incorporated municipalities, you'll see there's kind of the municipalities that have been in existence, incorporated for a lot longer, have a lot less county highway miles. You look at the city of Wausau and their total county highways miles within the municipal boundaries, 1.9 miles. And then you have the more recent incorporated villages. Sometimes, this is my assessment of it, they have a lot more county highway miles within those municipalities. You see probably the greatest example of that is the recently incorporated Village of Maine, more than 18 miles of county highway system within those village boundaries. To Jim's point about jurisdictional transfers, and I think to Supervisor Soibert's hand gesture, they normally come with a significant amount of money. I know Washington County, a much smaller county geographically and a much smaller county in terms of overall highway system, they were paying when they were trying to get municipalities to take those jurisdictional transfers a significant amount. Again, and their system is fundamentally different than ours in another important way that was alluded to by Committee Chair Robinson. That is, the vast majority of their system, in fact, it might be all of their system, is all season. So a fundamentally different experience than what Marathon County has, but still the underlying idea of really taking a look at and trying to have a strategy. Again, going back to what this entire discussion is all about is, what is your funding strategy? We need one of those because that will inform what our plan is. There's a lot of different ways, several different ways to do it. But in terms of if we operate off of assumptions that you provide us kind of the goals of the plan, we'll develop those funding options for you. Again, it's ultimately up to the county board how we get there, not only in terms of setting what the policy is in terms of expectation, PACER rating of 7. You'll see there's within your packet, there's a chart that shows that evolution. With the increased investment, the PACER rating has improved. However, PACER rating is a function of funding. Jim can talk about kind of the inflationary pressures on the highway department. But jurisdictional transfers, I think, was one of the areas. I mean, when I started in administration, I thought that same thing. Let's really hey, we have a lot of county highway miles in incorporated municipalities that act as local roads. Those should be the responsibility of the municipality. Well, my opinion of that doesn't necessarily serve as a persuasive one to get them to take on the responsibility to do that.
Tom and Kurt.
Supervisor Seubert?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. How do EVs contribute to the pot, and hybrids? How do hybrids contribute to the pot? And the reason I'm asking, last week I probably drove past 100 plus plug-in stations. Not one vehicle was using it to recharge their electric vehicle. So, I mean, are they paying at the plug-in, or how are they paying the gas tax? How is that equal gas tax coming to the county or the state or anything?
I'm certainly not an expert. I'll defer to Jim, but I can speak for a hybrid, having owned one, or currently owning one. Your registration is higher. The vehicle registration for a hybrid or electric vehicle is a higher registration fee through the state than a purely gas-powered vehicle. But of course, the gas tax amount is driven by the amount of gas a vehicle uses. So the EV purely electric is not going to be paying gas tax. I don't know how the charging stations work in terms of what the utility, because essentially they're operating as a utility, what the charge is for that. Jim, do you have any, apart from the higher registration, I don't really know much about that.
No, it's part of the higher registration. I know we're working right now. Chair Gibbs has his hand up, but I can say with they do pay a higher registration fee. I don't have that number in front of me right now. I'm going to go back in my memory bank, but it's like 6,500 or 7,500 miles a year. You know, they pay more for registration, but if you drive your vehicle, which most people in Wisconsin do, drive more than that 6,500 to 7,000 miles a year, we're not receiving as much revenue as we would if they'd be driving a vehicle with the 24 miles to the gallon. So
I believe that the TDA, the report that Deb was referencing, the hybrids pay an extra $75 a year, and electric vehicles pay an additional $260 a year. In addition, a portion of the sales tax from the sale of electric vehicles goes into the transportation fund. So based upon the report, electric vehicles are actually paying more than a gas-powered vehicle over a shorter period of time. So they are paying into the transportation fund. Kurt?
There's another thing that just went into effect January 1 of 2025, and that is when the charging stations in the public sphere are used, there's a kilowatt charge per kilowatt that goes into the transportation fund. That just started in January 1, 2025. I don't know exactly what the cents per kilowatt is, but it's 3 cents per kilowatt of electricity used in a public charging station that has been paid into or into the transportation fund. But again, that just started January 1 of this year.
Supervisor Hart? Other questions, Tom?
So do we think at $75 a year for a hybrid, that's the equivalent to what he would be paying in gas tax? I mean, at $75 a year at 40-some cents a gallon tax, that's only 200 gallons. I don't think there's one hybrid that uses less than 200 gallons. Or 200 miles, I mean. That's just my thought.
The report didn't address that specific issue. It did address the issue of electric vehicles with the sales tax at the time of sale and the $260 a year. We could ask if that was addressed, but I don't have any way to answer that, Tom.
Thank you.
I think that when you run the numbers, the $75 additional charge, depending on the mileage that you're calculating, going back to what the commissioner said, 6,200 miles equates out to fairly close to, at 27 miles average, about the same as the gas tax would on 6,200 miles a year average travel. But if they're going more than that, then they're falling short.
On the EV.
Yep, correct.
And I don't know that it's directly applicable, but in that report on the full transportation TDA report, page 31 of 41, which is 29 of the actual document as it's numbered, they do have I think this goes to your point and perhaps Jim's, the cost to operate a vehicle in the state of Wisconsin, for those of you that have had the privilege of, or maybe not privilege of living in a different state where they have your registration fee is based on the value of your vehicle or certain other aspects of your vehicle. Wisconsin, of course, is that flat fee that Ms. Jackson was talking about. And when you look at that, to I think Supervisor Soibert's point, particularly as it relates to newer high-cost vehicles like an EV, when your value of your vehicle is not somehow correlated with the registration fee, what you see in the state of Wisconsin is that lower overall cost to operate a vehicle. And in fact, I'm just seeing this now, but the third, I'll zoom in a little bit on the screen here. On that page, the third kind of category from the left or the second from the right, that is I believe, is a Chevy Bolt hybrid vehicle, or no, that's the Volt, I believe. But either way, you'll see the impact of that less cost to operate a vehicle based on just largely the lower registration fee and the flat gas tax, which is also built into that graph.
If I could tack on to DOT, I actually have it up on my computer right now. The DOT on their website, you can put in a type of car, the vehicle make, the model, and the year, and it'll tell you exactly how much each person's paying. And the one that's up right now is a Acura Crossover 2020. If you have that vehicle in Wisconsin, you're paying $229 registration fee, or it says how much does it cost in fees and taxes to drive in Wisconsin. So it costs $229 to drive that vehicle in Wisconsin. Same vehicle in Minnesota is $602. Iowa is $591. Illinois is $520, and Michigan's $431. So you can see the registration fee and what we're paying for what it takes actually to drive a car in Wisconsin. We're not close to any of our neighboring states.
And just to verify, thank you, Chair Pfeifferich, the 2022 Chevy Bolt is an EV. So on that document, you see the reduced cost. As it relates, going back to what your agenda is for, is a discussion about funding strategy and action to take. Not sure that it would probably not result in immediate action by the state of Wisconsin, but should you wish to weigh in on kind of this idea that Supervisor Soibert, started us down this conversation of registration fees not keeping pace, can always utilize your advocacy role through resolution to your local representatives in the state to propose that those registration fees be increased and with all funds go directly to transportation, but I also understand that too is rife with different challenges.
Any other questions? Gert?
It doesn't relate to any of the, well, I think it relates to the ultimate question of funding for the system. The question, Jim, you had mentioned, and I know that we did the inventory of culverts up from 6 to 20 feet in the county, and in that inventory, was there an inventory of the condition of those, and is that going to lead to necessity for increased funding to bring those into compliance, that we don't have additional highway systems being denigrated and putting in weight restrictions on.
So what we did in Merritt, there was two ways of doing it. You could do the inventory first and then the inspection. Seeing that we did all of our own on the county system, just the county system, we did the inventory right away. But that it hasn't progressed far enough where we know what's happening with that. We did find one of the structures in bad enough shape that we replaced it immediately. But we had over 500 structures countywide. Do you remember what the county number was? 190-ish in that area. So at this point, the Department of Transportation is just going to take a look after the inspections are done in 2025 for all the culverts. Then they're going to come up with a formula of what the funding source is going to be. That would be in the next budget cycle. So the one after this, we're probably talking 27, 28 budget.
Right, but I think it's intuitive into that we know that those probably are not going to be, it's not going to reduce the amount of necessity for funding. It's going to only increase the necessity for funding. And I think what we're looking at is being futuristic and trying to understand how do we fund, and it goes to the question on the agenda, how do we fund the infrastructure that we have and maintain the infrastructure that we have at the PACER rating that we've determined, the board, has determined that we want to provide to the citizens in the county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at pages 3 and 4 where it talks about the unrestricted fund balance in the highway department and the working capital needs. And from just over, and I appreciate the 2014 to 2023 numbers. In 2019, if you take the unrestricted amount and less the working capital, we have 37.8 million. In 2023, that grows to 49 million. So those are unbudgeted or budgeted amounts that have been unspent, a growth of $11 million. So we have budgeted for this spending and additional investments that it appears haven't been spent and then roll over into the highway fund. Is that how I'm correctly understanding that?
I think from a high level, simple standpoint, yes. There's one of the primary reasons for that growth is alluded to in the TDA report, which is the influx of dollars that Jim referenced through the BIL and Investment in Jobs Act. But that highway reserve grows fundamentally, simply put, by monies not being spent or us receiving higher reimbursements on projects or projects coming in under budget. I don't know, Sam, if there's anything we want to highlight on that. I think we also sent out, and I know the county board members know this, but prior to the budget, a summary memo with kind of going through just what Supervisor Marshall laid out, that idea of what amount is left in reserve, what is restricted, what is committed, what is assigned, and then also what did you spend? Because the most recent numbers we have are really as a result of the audit from 2023. So what did you spend? What did you budget to spend in 24? What did you actually spend in 24? What did you plan on budgeting, or what did you budget to spend in 25? And when you factor all those things in, without having end of year done, and I know Sam doesn't have quite the end of year done yet for 24, you get to a place where you're essentially at, I'm going to do my math here, 42, we're at 42 million, really now about 41 million based on budget amendments and future obligations of what I'll call remaining unassigned funds. The question that I know this committee and both committees have talked about is how does that relate to the potential construction of the future highway shop if the board decides to move in that direction. So if you take that funding from the 2023 audit, we can get you updated numbers, but the best number, and I don't have that math done, from what you had budgeted for in 2025, the proposed budget for 2025 had just shy of $3 million of reserve spending. Of course, the budget, through the budget adoption process, another $1 million was spent out of those reserves. So we can get you that updated information, but of course, they are inextricably related. How do you use reserves with the looming question of the highway shop? Because that will influence your strategy, absolutely.
Supervisor Marshall.
I guess I'm just pointing out that we have been told that we have a lack of investment in our planning, and we need to look at that. The numbers of continually rolling over additional funds year after year after year would say maybe we had those planned investments, and through good fortune or that we should have spent those and maybe pulled projects ahead, because if we would have spent that $11 million, we would have more highways covered, is my point. Thank you.
I would just like to interject. First of all, I don't think most people realize the value that Jim Griesbach brings to us as a highway commissioner. I think in just my observations are that he chases every last funding source possible, whenever possible, to try to lower the reliance on the property tax and the wheel tax for our projects. And he's been a master at that, whether it's Highway K or some of the others. And one of the reasons we've grown that is because he's supplanted local tax dollars with funding from state and federal sources. A second thing is you have to understand that one of the important components of the Highway Department budget is winter maintenance and maintenance activities. We don't control that. And last winter, we had a wonderful winter for the purposes of snow removal because there wasn't any snow. If we have a large snowfall like we did the year before in March, that can go away in a hurry. And we have to keep in mind that there are elements beyond our control, such as the weather, that have a very significant impact upon that end balance. But we also saw a historic infusion of dollars from the federal government coming to the state investing dollars because of the surplus in local roads that we won't see going forward. So I think we need to temper some of that surplus by the fact that there was an unprecedented level of increased funding from the state and the federal level. Not to say that we should ignore it. I think we have to be cognizant of it, but there are reasons why the growth was there. And Jim, you can pay me later.
If I could add one other thing, I think the county board has done, integrating the idea of rolling stock funding, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about that if there are questions, Jim, kind of some of the challenges we've had with rolling stock. We hadn't upped the policy relative to rolling stock for, I don't know, Jim, about 10 years, or is it longer than that? 13. I knew he was going to correct me. Not that he's not keeping track. I think to Supervisor Marshall's point, right? Maybe we should have spent, pulled in and addressed those rolling stock issues sooner. I think, I could argue both sides. That's the former lawyer in me. But I do think, again, going back to the highway shop, right now Jim buys equipment in some fashion. One of the considerations we have is, does it fit? And again, we have some long-term decisions, and by we, I mean really the board, has some long-term policy related decisions it needs to make that will impact operations, and I think we have a good opportunity to do those. They all relate to funding strategy, and the way you've crafted your agenda, I think, is good in terms of starting those conversations. And I think one of the things that's alluded to in each of the reports is that idea of public perception. The TDA report, I think, does a really nice job of talking through the challenges with the public. I think you as board members certainly hear more so even than I do that, people just got their property tax bills, which is their favorite time of the year. Second only to the time when they receive their vehicle registration in the mail, which I just got one of mine. So how do you navigate that, I think, is a challenge. But navigating it in a way that is that long-term kind of, I think Chair Gibbs used it, forward thinking or forward focused, I think is important. County staff, we will work through whatever funding strategy you have. There are different ways to do it. I have colleagues where their counties borrow for roadway maintenance. Some do it on a long-term basis, 20-year or 10-year bonding, 10-year borrowing. Others do it every year, which again was alluded to in the TDA report. The state's strategy has fundamentally changed over the last several decades. Marathon County's strategy has largely, this is my understanding, and please those with longer time horizon, Jim, feel free to jump in, but our strategy had been really pay as you go. We tried to fund those projects, particularly, well, every project, but even large projects with on-hand funds, building bridges with cash. The ability to do that after the early 2000s with the changes in levy limits went down, but we still had healthy reserves and were able to do that with the implementation of the vehicle registration fee. It was another, to borrow a term from Ms. Jackson, another shot in the arm that allowed us to continue that funding without compromising other programs. Similarly, the Investment in Jobs Act and the federal funds passed through the state allowed that to continue, but we should have that long-term strategy. And there are a couple ways to do that. You can bond. A couple of counties in the state of Wisconsin recently went out to referendum to exceed the levy limits, whether for infrastructure or for public safety related projects. That's an option. That is about the only, if you ask me, how do you rank them in terms of cost efficiency? That's the creme de la creme, provided you want to do it through property tax, is to exceed the levy limits, because the cost to procure those dollars is exceedingly minimal. The next on your list is the registration fee, which we can talk about. The state administrative cost on that is quite attractive. Borrowing poses problems. It's still then collected through property tax through the debt levy, but it comes with the increased financing costs and interest. Think about your mortgage, right? Your interest costs and your closing costs. Similar things exist with borrowing for governments. So those are all strategies. And of course the other one is do less, kind of make changes to your policies relative to PACER rating or service level or cuts in other areas. But those are, it's a complex question overall, but your choices are not, the choices themselves aren't overly complex. It's just the ramifications of those choices. And I don't know, Sam, if you had anything you wanted to add on any of the funding pieces.
Just on the funding piece, we did have somebody run just a theoretical scenario on a $3 million bonding back in the beginning of December based on current rates. A 1 year, $3 million bonding would have costed an additional $193,000. You can spread it out over 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. But again, as you stated, there is additional cost associated with the bonding to take into consideration.
And I think I shared at the last meeting
Okay.
what the administrative cost from the vehicle registration fee was to collect the $3 million, the $3,200. Thanks, Jim. So you see, therein lies the rub of the impact of interest and financing costs.
So we had one other bit of information, the highway expenditures compared to our peers. Lance, did you want to handle that with the Green Book or? It's 59 in the supplement.
So within your packet, there's the link to the Green Book. Again, just for context of what the Green Book is, it's put out by the Counties Association based on the documentation that every county needs to submit, and Jim has to submit a whole lot to the state of Wisconsin relative to highway funding for things like general transportation aid calculation and other record keeping. So you'll see on page 31 of 72 at the link, but it really is, if you have your hard copy Green Book in front of you, it's on page 25. They essentially rank each of the counties per capita in terms of highway spending, and you'll see where Marathon County falls. Our highway expenditures per capita are 87. You might then ask, well, what does that mean? $87 per person, where does that put us in the state? They break it down by quartiles. This is the most recent data they had at the time was 2022. You'll see Marathon County, that first quartile, or the lowest per capita spending on infrastructure, that first quartile tops out at $111. So we're significantly under that, would be my characterization. You can make your own if that, but we are in that first quartile. Importantly, again, to note in terms of lane miles, we are the top in the state of Wisconsin. Jim takes great pride in that, the largest highway system. So kind of a dichotomy. I think, again, it speaks to what John brought up before, Chair Robinson. We do very, very well. Jim's adage, he's got a couple of them, the Jimisms, but hey, if you show up with $1, or if I show up with a pocket full of dimes and you're going to give me for every 20 cents I get $1, I'm going to show up with a pocket full of dimes, talks about that. But then also, it's really good to have ready to go plans on the shelf, which is actually in the TDA, that Wisconsin Policy Forum document. For those of you that have been on this committee for a while, Jim has said that every year, and we do always have plans on the shelf ready to go, which then when the state says, hey, does anybody have ready to go projects when new funding comes in, we've done very well, which I think contributes to this. I wouldn't view this as a bad thing, that we're in a low per capita funding. We are very, very intelligent and very successful in how we deploy the dollars. Again, with our PACER rating, I think we're, compared to a lot of other counties, we're in a really good spot. But just to give you the kind of lay of the land relative to our highway expenditures.
That's based on property tax support. So, I don't think reflects the wheel tax. So keep that in mind.
Just a general question. I mean, as we talk about, the potential future highway shop, curious what operational efficiencies we'll see coming out of it. We talk about the plow trucks coming back to the shop and they have to unhook to take the trucks in. That's additional man hours, moving materials around, those kinds of things. And the reason why I think it's maybe germane to the topic is, as we talk about a funding strategy for the highway department, will we see additional gains that take down operational expenses? Just curious if that's kind of part of the plan.
I don't have a report, but I things that come off the top of my head is when Minister Leonard mentioned before, we buy trucks to fit our building. My opinion, we shouldn't have many single axle trucks, which we have quite a fleet of them right now, just because we can't fit them into our shop. So, that's one example right there. If we could buy the right piece of equipment, instead of that truck going halfway through its route, turning around and coming back to refill, now I can run the entire section with that one vehicle without returning. So that's just one example. We'll see some operation efficiencies from there. We're going through the process right now, looking at our existing building. Some of our furnaces in our building right now are from the 70s. I believe they're a little more efficient now. So, there's things like that we're going to see, more efficiencies through it.
The other thing I would add is, it's not operational. I think that's a great point. But we do have, Jim alluded to capital investment. And if we need to make capital investments, it's just a question of the board. How do you want us to do that? If it's remain in our current location, we talked about this before with the Mosinee salt storage location. If we stay in that current location, it does behoove us. So to Jim's point, if we need to have plow trucks get salt during winter or get brine, we want to make sure we're strategically located. So that, I think, not only the fuel piece, but also location that to maximize plow routes. Even though the best laid plans are really subject to Mother Nature, as always, I think there are some efficiencies there that would come from relocation, depending again on where that happens.
Yeah, relocation would allow us to close down our Mosinee satellite shop completely, which the FAA has changed some of their flight pattern rules. Talking to the director of Graffy down there, at some point we know that we're going to have to move that satellite shop down there. If we wouldn't relocate it, hopefully the area that we're kind of planning on at this point, I'd have to rebuild that satellite shop in the tune of, I have no plans done, but just talking to people in the know, $67 million.
Okay, thank you. And I think just kind of,
Go ahead.
sorry. One other thing I was going to bring up. So, one of the things I've been hearing is, when the wheel tax came in, different topic, it was a short-term thing, right? Well, since that time, like when we look at just kind of that unrestricted balance that's continued to grow, 2016 to 2017 was roughly $3 million, to 18 went from 36 to 40, from 18 to 19 went to 44. So there's been kind of that continued growth in that unrestricted balance, but the wheel tax has stayed at the $3 million. So, I've given credit before, for the usage of grants, the bipartisan infrastructure law, those kinds of things have helped us continue to build that fund. But, we've also seen the levy come down. So in 2017, it went from $6 million down to $3 million, and it's kind of floated up between 2.8, 2.9 to $3 million on an annual basis. So we've made that decision as a board to move the wheel tax from helping to make improvements to being an ongoing revenue source. And that's the feedback that I get, is it was supposed to be short-term and not a long-term funding strategy. So when you combine that with that continued growth in unrestricted and kind of that overall highway fund, that's I think the large concern that I have, is how we're kind of treating that and not utilizing it, to Supervisor Marshall's point. So.
The spending on bituminous hasn't gone down. The amount of bituminous supported by levy has been impacted by the wheel tax. You take the wheel tax away, the levy has to come, somehow we have to pay for that. You either draw down your reserves and that's one-time expenditure or one-time funding. So I think you need to keep in mind that, once it's gone, and it's not there the next year, and you can't assume that we're always going to carry that forward. But the wheel tax and the levy equal what we spend on bituminous. Chair Gibbs.
And I'm very, very well aware of the growth that has happened in the Highway Reserve Fund. But I think, again, I think we need to be really cognizant of the efforts that we've had through federal dollars, state dollars, but then also be cognizant of and those numbers fall a little short of telling the true story, the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is, in 2024, that number came down to 43 million, so it's no longer the 50-some million that it was. And then board action has even taken that down in the 2025 budget. We will find out once we have the audit where those actual numbers are when the audit is complete for the 2024. But I think we need to be understanding that board has taken action to effectively spend down some of those reserves in its actions on the last two budgets. And so that hasn't continued to grow, even though the wheel taxes and the registration fee has still been collected and used to maintain our roads. And our roads have maintained, and our PACER rating has continually increased a little bit in the last couple of years.
We want to have more discussion on any of the reports or move on to some of our other. Supervisor Hardinger?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to agree with Chair Robinson, and there's an old term, no good deed goes unpunished. So I understand that we're operating, we've got this massive surplus, and people see that and they say, why are we getting taxed wheel tax if we have all this money in the highway? Well, we're basically punishing the highway department for doing a good job. We're doing less with more as far as what we tax our people for and what we're providing in the county. So I think that's predominantly should be the first thing out of our mouths is it's all due to that department and what they're able to do and the grants and what they have to push through for the administration to get that done, the paperwork that has to get it done, the timelines that they have to put it in. They're doing a great job, without a doubt. I agree with that. And to Supervisor Marshall's statement, yes. How do we have all this money in there? Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing they're doing their job. They're doing the right thing. We don't want to chop them off at the knees now and say, okay, well, good luck next year because maybe that funding's not going to be there anymore. But we've been at this conversation for about an hour now. And the first chunk of it was very grim. Here comes everything down the road. It doesn't look good. We're not going to be able to maintain what we got. It's going to be very difficult. Whether money's going to be there, where it's not going to be there. We put a lot on them that, hey, keep doing what you're doing. The grant money might show up, might not show up. We had a couple things, the culverts, bridges and things this last year. These things do come up. I agree wholeheartedly we should operate with at least a minimum of a year's budget in our reserves for things like that that are going to come up. But I think there's also things that we can do with the money that we have there. So we're borrowing less, but not at the same time putting them in a position that they're going to have to do a lot and they're going to have to expect things that have basically been granted to us in the past. So I'd like to see what the options are for moving forward from here.
I think as Supervisor Hardinger points out, we've been at this discussion for a while. I think we've gone through 1 and 2 under A. So if it's okay with the committee members, I'd like to move on to item 3, which is what do you want this decision-making process to entail? We've got a lot of information that's been presented with 3 different reports today. We've had different conversations at our joint meeting last month. Is there any more information that you need? Supervisor Seubert.
Thank you. I would like the piece that I would like is if the wheel tax gets voted down, what the rate is going to increase to make up that $3 million plus. I think that's important to everybody because if you put it on taxes, the people that have their own house, the people that are going to pay for that if it's put on taxes. Those people living in apartments, living in trailers, are going to pay very little towards that. But you can drive through any park and there's 3-4 cars sitting outside every trailer, that are paying equally now to everybody and not paying. Thank you.
Scott?
Just to follow up on that, and I think it relates to the next section, B, do you want to engage the public as well? Perhaps having a one-pager that gives us the options, if the administration or somebody could put that together, that we could present to our constituents, or, we speak to them, just that lays out, what the costs are, if we want to fund this through levy, if we want to fund this through the wheel tax or borrowing. I think that may be helpful.
Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I think a one-pager clearly spells out and provides the information to the public. The question becomes, are we going to be engaging the public with the information that we have from these 3 reports also to give them the full breadth and depth of what needs to be looked at to make this decision? When we talk about, the cost, the administration cost in the registration fee, you're talking about 3 cents that the state of Wisconsin Department of Transportation collects for every $25. And so that equates out into a percentage of 0.12% per year. Again, I'll repeat, 0.12% per year. When you can't put the $3 million onto the levy on the operational side at all because of levy limits. You can put it there, but then you're going to have to do some $3 million less in other areas in the county that is funded with that $3 million currently. So you could put it on levy if you choose to bond for it, and the cost to bond for it then is going to depend on, do you bond short term, which is an option, meaning you bond for it and pay for it the very next year, and we heard that cost to get that same $3 million, $193,000 in interest. So we can look at a $1,200 cost at 3 cents per thousand, or 3 cents for $3 million on the registration fee, or $193,000 for a one-year borrowing, and that's the cost that the taxpayers are going to also. Now, if you, because I did do the math and calculate it out, if you looked at borrowing that for a 10-year period, your $25 per year registration fee versus bonding over a 10-year period is another option. And then you're talking about $31.59 in comparison to $25. So there's a lot of information. I don't know how you boil it down to a one-page and provide all of the pertinent facts and information. One, the need that we have, and then how do we bring into that conversation the last 5 years worth of discussions that we've had about a new highway shop? Because I think that's pertinent when we talk about the highway reserve, because we could, in some cases, we could do less in road maintenance, and that will degrade the system over time and bring down our PACER rating. But I think this committee, the infrastructure committee, historically has said, let's not do that. So then it's just a matter of funding. And I think this committee has, at least the infrastructure committee over my tenure has said, at least over the last 5 to 7 years, had a discussion about a new highway shop and has been consistently saying, let's move forward with a new highway shop. And that is a need that has to get done at some point. Now it's a matter of how do we pay for that? I think the last estimate that we heard was that the highway shop would potentially cost $59 million, and we could allocate some of the reserve that we have and reduce the bonding costs to the taxpayer, and therefore not add additional costs to the taxpayer in the long term.
I think that Supervisor Lemmer first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To add to both of the one-pager ideas, I think it would be helpful to understand why the reserve fund did get so high, and maybe what the plan was for it included in that. So I feel like we're talking about an elephant by studying an ear today and then a tail tomorrow. To put this all in a summary doc so we get the whole picture would be helpful. Not only for me, but for my neighborhood group, who, when we talked about this, they were wondering why we shifted from property owners to now drivers. Some thought that was hard on them because they don't have the money. They don't own property, they rent, and they're like, are you going to raise it? So these funding things, I think, need to be looked at. The money has to come from somewhere. But to understand maybe the philosophy of what was going into some of these previous decisions would be helpful.
I think one of the most important things as we talk about public engagement is, what's our purpose in doing so? We can do a survey out there and ask the question of, does everybody want lower taxes? I think we'll know the answer to that. Does everybody want quality roads? I think we'll know the answer to that. It's just being strategic and being able to inform the public with what we're trying to balance, and then how we go about it is the important thing. So interested to know what the thoughts are on purpose for our engagement, and just thoughts on that.
Supervisor Marshall.
One thing I thought would be, is I remember at the 2024 budget, we passed a resolution saying when we move all our departments over to our Lakeview campus, that we will divest of our 210, 212 River Drive and Social Services Building. And I believe in there, it also said that we will get an appraisal. So perhaps the sale of those properties could be part of this equation to offset some of the building. So if we could go ahead and know what those are valued at, as well as the value of the West Street location that we'll be vacating. Thank you.
Supervisor Poole?
Yeah, going to purpose, before the full board meeting when we discussed the budget, I, like a lot of other people's, probably got feedback from a number of constituents who were not fans of the wheel tax. And then I got from several who were non-constituents as well. So purpose for me would be to be able to explain to these people what your options are, assuming we want to keep everything fully funded. I think the Highway Department does a great job. It's one of our core responsibilities. We have to keep it there, but the question of how do we pay for it? So, the total cost, as Chair Gibbs said, if we have to breach levy limits to go into borrowing for this, I'd want to know that. Or if the wheel tax, we want to keep that in, as an option too. Borrowing, I don't really see that as an option, but we would be good to be able to have that information to let the people know if they have questions about it. So that's basically it for me.
And one of the ways we could do that is if you look at what the, I think it was the report from in the state, they had some pros and cons to various different things. We could do a spreadsheet. I don't know if you can cover the entire issue on one page, but you might be able to do it in a couple of pages and try to summarize what are the pros and cons of each approach, if that makes sense. Supervisor Hardinger.
Well, I think in respect to your question as to what we're doing to move forward, I think we've had a number of people weigh in that we need some kind of an executive summary that's going to be transparent, or at least a lot. We spent a lot of time in here going through all this. We spent the last hour going through a lot of different numbers. Most people don't. It's not what a lot of people want to, go through to or really understand it. The depth of what's behind this, and to appreciate exactly what Chair Gibbs said, it is. You're not just looking at, one little part of it. The whole thing comes into that. I understand that. But I think it would be beneficial to be able to, even that graph that we had with the state of Wisconsin showing how much of our taxes go into our county being one of the lower rates in the entire state and providing more services for more roads than any other county in the entire state. That might be something that I think most people, even just a small graph like that, will kind of snap to, okay, we really don't pay that much. And we really are getting a lot for our money. And we really are doing the right things. And people are being attentive and doing their homework, the people that are supposed to be doing their homework and attend these meetings and do that. So we're empowering them to make the right decisions based off that information. So if you want to learn more about that, here's the website and the link to it. But the broad spectrum is, we're doing a lot. We're doing the best that we can, given what we have. And we have really good people working for us to making sure that we're getting the most out of our money. And I think really that should be something, I think we can do that in probably a page. I mean, that one graph was, that's great. That speaks worlds, really. Because I think a lot of people, like you said, like the wheel tax was supposed to come and go. All right. But it has evolved into part of our budget. And we are operating at a surplus, but there are things that we are getting that weren't part of that budget. Then that's why part of the reason we have that surplus. And I think part of that, that credit goes to people in those positions, that they're doing the right things and they're doing a good job here. And I think that should also be part of that summary is that, how much has the commissioner got in grants in the last 10 years? That hasn't been a part of our budget. So I think those things will help people because you look at some of these numbers as, Supervisor Marshall explained, like it's just this huge number. You got $50 million sitting over there. How'd that get there? Why is that there? Why aren't we using it? Why aren't things being managed? Well, they're being managed very well. That's why it's there. So I think maybe that's something that we could convey to the public in a fairly short, one pager, I guess, if that would help.
We can go Chair Gibbs and then Administrator Leonard.
So getting back to, we had I had an educational session at one time provided by the UW, and one of the things in public engagement that you look at is what is the reason for engaging the public? Do we want to engage the public to inform? Do we want to engage the public to consult? Or do we want to engage the public to make the decision for us? And so that's, I think, what we're talking about here in the question on the agenda is, are we looking, do we want to just, because we have more information than we can possibly potentially provide to the taxpayer, do we want to make the decision, but yet we want to inform them of what went into the decision that we made? That would be informing them. And if so, how do we do that? The other is, do we consult with them and then provide them the same amount of information that we had and get their feedback after we've provided them with the level of information that this board has, that I would view as being consulting them? Or then the other is empowering them, and I call that a referendum. You go out, but now how do you educate the electorate on all of the information that we've been digesting over multiple, in some cases, multiple years? It becomes, there is potential ways, but so I think we're looking at what is the purpose? Do we want, and what is the method that we want to use? Do we want to inform? Do we want to consult, or do we want to empower?
And how? And how do we go about it? For instance, when the ARPA dollars came up, we had listening sessions here in Hatley and in Edgar to get public input, and we heard a lot of different things, but broadband was one of the top ones that came out of that. In the past, they've had discussions relative to the criminal justice system and what's the purpose of it, led by the Wisconsin Institute of Public Policy and Service. And I think that there was a lot of healthy dialogue as a result of that. Are there processes that you'd like to see, or do you want to start with the paper? I don't think we can get this on one page, but maybe we can get it in two sides of one page in 4 font. But I think you try to get it as, you want to be succinct, but yet cover it effectively. So I think we hear the message is short, sweet, to the point. And I think we've got an idea of what you'd like as a starting point, but then where do we, I think, to follow up on Chair Gibbs, where do you see us going with that? Is it a public hearing? Is it a series of educational meetings?
Can I offer one thing that I'm sure everyone has seen in the media? I agree. I've been taking notes. This is very helpful. Staff will work on I don't know that we want to call it a one-pager, but we'll work on that summary information. But my sense from the discussion, just reflecting back, is it's probably multiple things based on some of the comments. Supervisor Poole, you're talking about how you were contacted by constituents as part of the budget process, and some of the other, like the ability to have talking points. I know, quite honestly, when I started as the deputy administrator, Jim and I put together a frequently asked questions and a one-pager on the vehicle registration fee, so we can resurrect that and talk that through. Recently, a community similar to what Chair Robinson talked about with the ARPA process the county board used. For those of you that live within the school district, the Wausau School District, the last several years for them, the dominating conversation has been around what do you do with the facilities, which I think is a similar conversation to what we're talking about with vehicle registration fee and funding strategy, and their level of public engagement. Kind of to Chair Gibbs's point, it started with an inform, and it's kind of morphed to more of what I think, from my perspective, is a consultation. They formed, and this is my understanding, they got a group of about 50 people, diverse group of people in terms of background and experience, brought them together, and then spent what I believe is a significant amount of time over several meetings, hours, going through kind of the complexity of the issues related to school facilities and the idea that maybe they would move to divest, as Supervisor Marshall referenced, divest themselves or repurpose some of their facilities, and actually called upon that group of local people after receiving that education, that facilitated education and going through a process, to come forward with a recommendation to the school board. I was not part of that, but viewing from the outside, I think that looks, kind of as Chair Gibbs said, if that's an option, let us know and we can look at how you would seek to do that, because I think my sense from the outside, of course, you guys are getting the calls from your constituents, is there needs to be some substantial form of public engagement, whether that is just informing or consulting, or the referendum route to really present them with the options of, the option for referendum, of course, is always, do you exceed your levy to fund a thing? We could work on bringing forward some options for you, but I just wanted to make sure, I don't know if people have seen that. My sense is that was a far more effective, at least in the short term, it's been far more positively received than some of the other forms of engagement that the local school district had on that issue, because it is a very personally held, people care about their neighborhood schools, and that's what it related to. So just one option, if you're interested in that, I can look in and bring some ideas back what that might look like.
Thank you. Not many of you are on the board when we had the well-received rural addressing change. So I will revisit that, because I think we use the public engagement model probably appropriately there. It was discussed initially, well, why don't we just go out to a referendum? Why don't we, go out and get, buy-in by the public? And it was eventually discussed by the board that, no, I don't, because I don't know that there's enough time to educate the full population about the challenges that multiple 10 different addressing systems that we had currently in the county, and how public safety was being impacted. So what was ultimately decided was we would go forward and we would inform the public about what was the reason we chose, the board chose to move forward, what's the process, what's the pros, what's the cons, how is it going to be implemented, and then I think to the supervisor's point, it informed them of why the decisions were made that were made, and I think that's what we're talking about, is trying to inform the public why the decisions were made to at one point, the board had a discussion and had, to the public's response was, well, it was supposed to be a 1-year registration fee. And the following year, the board took the discussion and went even one step further and said, look, we know that the long-term funding shortfalls is going to demand more and more, and levy limits are not going to allow us to, and from a financial standpoint, from a financial viability standpoint, it was going to cost more if we were going to bonding, and we didn't want to lower the quality of roads. So a long discussion about, again, I think what I'm hearing, at least from everybody, is the potential of at least having either informing the public about why the decision is that the board made or didn't make, what our options are, or the potential about having some specific focus on consulting, but consulting similar to what the Wausau School Board did, and getting the input once those individuals are fully brought to education that we have.
Supervisor Soibert.
Thank you. I was on the board when this was brought forward back in 16, 17, 15. And if anybody knew Supervisor Jim Seafield, he was adamant about calling this a tax. He says this, it is not a tax, it is a user fee. Everybody using the roads are paying equally. Or a tax, you don't distribute it equally. And I mean, that's something we should be thinking, is it a user fee? And I think it is. I think it's been all along. And if you go back and look at the history of this thing, that's the sole reason we have this money in reserve. And how many times can you complain about having a windfall, I'll call it, of money saved, money in reserve, because at the end of the year, he didn't go to work and say, hey, we got $1 million. We got to spend that this week or we got to give it back. So think about that. Thank you.
I think one of the interesting things is Administrator Leonard was talking about the working group of 50 members. I'm fairly certain we have a 38-member working group that's geographically dispersed from a number of different backgrounds that has made a commitment to researching these issues and representing their specific voters. Maybe it's the best that we work to inform instead of the consulting direction. What are folks' thoughts on timeline that how we bring this to a head? Chair Gibbs.
Well, I don't mean to dominate but I think we can't separate, there's two parts to this question. I think one, we talk about the registration fee and the funding for infrastructure and the infrastructure system that we have. We talk about tax levy, we talk about debt, but we also are talking about a huge capital investment of a highway shop. And how does that play into using some of the reserves to potentially offset borrowing costs to the taxpayer long term? So, I think the registration fee and the funding of the infrastructure that we have is tied together, in my opinion, with the future potential highway shop that we're talking about. We talk about being able to potentially generate, and I think the supervisor put it very well, there's potential efficiencies that can be gained by a new highway shop, and our future purchases may be different with a new highway shop, because you might be looking at quad axles instead of single axles in future purchases. And that may generate efficiencies, but it will all be utilized in hopefully reducing that structural deficit that we just seen that the future plan has long term. I think, I don't know that we're going to solve all of but I would like to have, I would, at this point, I'm going to make a motion, because I think there's something that is, that the full board hasn't had the opportunity to have all of the information that these two committees have had, and the history that we've had about the new highway shop and how that intertwines with the registration fee and the potential use. So I'd make a motion that we assign $30 million out of the Highway Reserve Fund for the future construction of the highway shop, the future highway shop, and direct staff to provide a full board, a presentation on the steps taken in the past and efforts that are relevant to the relocation of the highway shop, and provide that information in an educational session to the board in the March 2025 education meeting.
That is a motion of the Finance Committee. Is there a second among the Finance Committee members relative to that motion? The motion is to reserve 30 million of the reserves for the highway shop and to bring an educational presentation to the board at its March meeting.
Again, it's not spending any of it. What it is doing is assigning it to the potential of the new highway shop. But the full board still has to act on this, would have to act to actually even approve a highway shop. But what we haven't done is we've had discussions about this highway reserve. We've had discussions about the new highway shop, the new efficiencies, all of that. As it relates to, we talk about cost. I did an estimate of what that 30 million would do if you applied that to the highway shop versus bonding it for a 10-year period. So instead of using the 30 million reserve.
Chair, before we get, I need a second, and then we can go into the discussion. Is there a second for purposes of advancing it, or second by Supervisor Hart? All right, now, I apologize, but.
All right, no, you're right. So in looking at what those costs are, if we were to bond that 30 million instead of using the reserve that is there, that effectively over a 10-year period is going to increase the cost to the taxpayer. And now I'm just using a 10-year bonding instead of a 20-year bonding. 10-year bonding would increase the cost to the taxpayer by $7,913,646.52. And we've talked about that this excess has been there. It's been growing. But we also talk about we're going to, at some point, build a new highway shop. But we haven't allocated anything towards it. I think what this does is just allocates it towards it. It doesn't spend it. It just reserves it for and reduces the cost to the taxpayers by $7 million, almost $8 million on a 10-year bonding, or it reduces it when you take it out to 20 years. If you were bonded at 4.5% interest rate, it would decrease it by almost $15 million, because that's the interest cost that the taxpayers would fund bonding for that highway shop. The other thing that I would point out is that's using estimates today based on the availability of tax-exempt bonding. Now, there's some potential push at a federal level that's going to come up that I had a discussion at NACO. There's potential of discussion about repealing tax-exempt bonding for municipalities. And what that's going to do is increase the cost to the taxpayers when you bond for projects of this nature.
Supervisor Seibert.
Thank you. I mean, somewhere down the road, I might be in favor of this, but right now, there's so many questions. Old location, what's going to happen to the old location? Are we going to give it away? The new location, how much are we going to spend on a new location? We have none of that information. And until we have a location, how can we be talking about a building if we don't have the location? And how much is that location going to cost? How much is that new location going to take off the tax roll? And all those questions is where I'm at. Thank you.
It's HR really discussion though. You guys have the motion.
Well, any member of the county board can ask a
Fair enough.
question. Supervisor Jansen.
I think just in kind of the spirit of the information to make a decision, we talked about operational efficiency before, and not to get a document that's going to paint rainbows about all the great gains we're going to get out of the shop, but that would really help me get to a yes down the road as far as what are those gains that we're going to see. We talked about the trucks, we talked about, the labor efficiencies, those kinds of things. If we're making this sizable of an investment down the road, it'd be really helpful not only for me, but for my constituents to see what those gains are other than everything stays the same as far as outputs go.
Other, Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we do go ahead and reserve this $30 million and the Highway Department doesn't go forth, will that $30 million be used for upgrades to the existing? Or, is it encumbered then to the Highway Department for buildings, or does it revert back to the unrestricted account?
Sam can talk through what a sign means, but simply put, a sign doesn't spend anything. It's a accounting term of art, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam. It matters for the audit.
Correct. It's saying that money is restricted in some capacity, not restricted in the sense that you'll find it on the financial statements, but that the board, they dictated that money is supposed to be used for that certain purpose. Now, in any portion of that, if you don't need all of the money or you decide to go in a different direction, it's just another committee action or board action to unrestrict that money or unassign it.
And I should have said it doesn't actually give staff the ability to spend it. So it's like planning, saying part of my savings account is for a thing.
Vacation.
Yeah, part of it's for vacation, but it's not writing the check.
A question for Chair Gibbs is, would the intent of your motion be that we address all of the issues that we've raised relative to the frequently asked questions or the one-page summary, have all that put together for the purposes of presenting to the county board at March for the purposes of a discussion, if that helps, sort of wrap the arms around the issue? Is that your intent?
That's clearly my intent.
Because yours was limited to the highway shop, but
correct. But
I'm interpreting that then to be a comprehensive evaluation of the discussions that we've had the last two meetings.
Correct, comprehensive in the funding, the funding for the highway shop, but as it relates to the registration fee, as it relates to how we're going to fund the infrastructure, maintaining of the infrastructure long term.
Supervisor Poole.
To me, it seems like this is a bit reversed. I think we should hear from a full board first to see if we want to build a highway shop in this location and then assign the funding instead of just assigning the funding and not knowing for sure which direction we're going to go, and then retain some flexibility with what the funds are now if the board chooses not to go at this current location that's being proposed.
Supervisor Gisselman.
It is my understanding that the Infrastructure Committee has already, if not by vote, by consensus, have agreed that we should be moving on with the facility. Have we not?
Jim?
Have we not decided that?
Yes, I've been given direction to go ahead and we have the parcel line that we discussed in closed session to go ahead and pursue to try to get some offers of purchase to bring to the county board for review. My concern with the timing on this is I've been still waiting to hear back from the main landowner, Public Service, and I haven't heard anything back yet. So I don't know if I could have that put together by the 27th with, I'm hearing some of the board members want, as far as prices. I'm working with two different engineering firms right now, architectural firms, trying to give me some updated prices on the structure itself after some concerns of the overall cost. So I'm just a little leery that it may, if you want to have the site nailed down by purchase offers, I can't have that by the 20th of March.
Right. Well, I'm not concerned about the timeline is also on the agenda, but I'm not concerned about so much of that. I'm just concerned that there's an understanding coming from the Infrastructure Committee that we should be moving on sometime, I would think, and we can be telling sometime this year. I would hope that, I think we've decided that already. Have we not? We have not decided that.
that came out of closed session, that,
That was on the land, the move on the land, but not to okay anything else.
no, just the,
Right, to work on.
So that was well, then then I think the infrastructure committee, I sense there should be some, for instance, this year, with regard to moving on with the facility itself. And I think that comes into funding and that type of thing. But I think the county board, in the discussion of the budget, this was starting to become part of it, as in addition to the wheel tax. And I think the county board needs some kind of an answer sometime this year with regard to some kind of decisions coming out of these two committees.
We have a EEDC meeting at 3, just.
In light of the discussion, and in light of what I was taking I guess I was, with all of the discussions that have taken place in infrastructure over the past 5 to 7 years, the studies that we've done, the direction to move forward with at least potential seeking of possibly purchasing land. That was what the spirit of my motion was, and it was under the understanding that we were understanding that because of having to move the Mosinee location, that we were probably looking at building a new highway infrastructure shop. If that's not the case, and the committee has not made that determination, I'll respectfully withdraw my motion.
Is the second? So the motion has been withdrawn. So in light of the time, let me suggest that perhaps we ask administration to look at the issues that were raised today, concerns, try to get that one-page, 4-font summary prepared for people, but put together that FAQ or that information, come back, and when it is prepared, do another joint meeting, and then look at trying to advance that to the county board. Does that make sense? Chair or Supervisor Hart?
Thank you. I think I'm in agreement with that. I want us to move forward on a yes or no decision, because I feel like we're kind of going back and forth. I'm afraid that we're never going to get enough answers to make a final decision, and then we're just going to end up having what we've been having for the last 8 years, is we don't make a decision, the cost gets more expensive, the land goes somewhere else, and then we start this all over again. So I would like us to make a decision, yes or no, soon. I will say that the crux of this is, for me, is I would support moving this out, because really the highway department doesn't belong in the middle of the city of Wausau. And it's a few blocks from a school. It's kind of in a residential area. It's next to a park. It just, for me, I'll be supporting moving forward, but those are the choices. Thank you.
Anything further, Supervisor Hardinger?
So what would be the best way to convey a summary of what we need from the commissioner to bring back here to our next meeting in February so we can make an informed decision? I mean, do you feel like you've been given a clear?
Yeah. I believe I'll work with administration and,
Okay.
Location is
And
if we don't get a
cost.
location, this might be a year out.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing too, we don't
Get a
know that.
location.
Well, I can work with administration on the report that you want. I am working on the land, but buying this amount of land is not going to happen overnight. But we do have the location. I just need to work through the process. How that process goes is probably out of my hands.
So I don't know if I want to lock us into February 6th, but sometime in February. Is that?
I think Lance could get it done by then.
We'll bring you back what we have. I mean, and my commitment is we'll do our best to get that done with the summary information, and we'll talk offers to purchase at least. Which, again, just to be very clear for the public, and I know you guys all know this, any offer to purchase or any purchase of land has to go through the board process.
Gary?
Just finally, I think that we need to present to the board, the county board, a package. It doesn't seem to me that we should be and that's maybe another vote of the infrastructure, but it seems to me that the package includes the land and includes some kind of facility, because if we're just going to take it one step at a time, we'll have the land, but, we don't have the money for the facility. I think we're doing something, in some capacity, we're putting the package together, and I would hope that the administration would move somehow that kind of a decision is made, and maybe that's a vote of infrastructure at some point in time, but how can we buy the land and then make a decision at some point in time with regard to the facility? I think it's a package, and I would hope that we move in that direction. Thank you.
Anything further? We're past our 3 o'clock. Chair Gibbs?
Just one thing to expand upon, and I think, incumbent upon that would be the funding sources that are used to cover the acquisition and/or construction costs, whatever that formula is, whether it's bonding, whether it's using part of the highway reserve, and I think it's incumbent upon us to look at it holistically as the funding sources for infrastructure too. Thank you.
I think the attorney is giving us the nod that we need to wrap up, because we've got another meeting scheduled in this room. So we've heard what you want. We'll work, Randy and I will work together on trying to coordinate the timing based upon when I don't think we want to come if we're that close, if we can get all of the information, so we'll let you know when that is. So I would then entertain a motion for adjournment. It's moved by Supervisor Hart, second from Finance, second by Supervisor Lemmer. All members of the HR Finance Committee for adjournment will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Look for a motion to adjourn infrastructure. We have a motion by Soibert, second by Jedson. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you for your time, everyone.